Judge mocks teenager in court, shocked to learn he's a genius attorney in disguise. Introduction: the courtroom drama begins. The air in the Los Angeles County Courthouse was thick with anticipation. Judge Walter Grayson, a seasoned and often cynical magistrate, leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the polished wood of his desk. Before him stood Jalen Dawson, a 19-year-old accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. The charges were serious, but the way the judge looked at Jalen made it clear that, to him, this wasn't about justice, it was about teaching a cocky teenager a lesson. "You think you're some kind of legal expert?" Grayson smirked. "This isn't a debate club, kid." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff, the stenographer, even the prosecutor, smirked. Everyone was in on the joke, except Jalen. He wasn't laughing. He had spent years preparing for this moment, though not in the way anyone might expect. A genius in disguise. Unlike other teenagers who memorized sports stats or played video games, Jalen had grown up consuming case law like others consumed pop culture. His mother, Denise Dawson, was a paralegal with over 2 decades of experience, and Jalen had spent countless nights listening to her recount the injustices she witnessed: prosecutors cutting corners, defense attorneys giving up too soon, judges playing favorites. By the time he was 14, he understood courtroom procedures better than most law students. But none of that mattered to Judge Grayson. To him, Jalen was just another young man who had made a bad decision. "Let's make this quick," the judge sighed, flipping open the case file. "I have a golf game at 2. The audience chuckled again. But this time, something shifted. Jalen's lips curled into a faint smirk, because Grayson had just made his first mistake. And the courtroom hadn't noticed yet. The prosecution's case unravels. Mitchell Carrington, the confident and polished prosecutor, stood up and confidently presented the case. Jalen had been found behind the wheel of a stolen Audi A6. His fingerprints were on the steering wheel. He allegedly attempted to flee from the police. "Seems straightforward to me," Judge Grayson said, leaning forward. Most people in the room nodded in agreement. The case was open and shut, or so it seemed. But Jalen had spent years studying trials. And he could already see the cracks forming. A defendant turns the tables. Lisa Thornton, Jalen's public defender, hesitated as she stood to speak. But before she could get a word out, Jalen placed a hand on her arm, a silent request. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The room fell silent. Judge Grayson arched an eyebrow. "You'll what?" "I'll be defending myself." The courtroom burst into whispers. Carrington let out a sharp laugh. This should be interesting. But no one was laughing when Jalen took his first step forward. "Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution." Carrington folded his arms. "Go ahead." "You said Officer Daniel Ruiz personally saw me behind the wheel, correct?" "That's right," Carrington replied, clearly impatient. Jalen nodded. "And that testimony is in his report?" "Of course it is." Jalen turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony." Judge Grayson squinted. "On what grounds?" "Because Officer Ruiz was not even on duty when the chase began." A flicker of confusion crossed Carrington's face. "What are you talking about?" "If the court allows me, I'd like to request Officer Ruiz's GPS logs from that night. If his report says he witnessed me in the vehicle, then his location data should confirm it." Jalen let the words hang. "But I have a feeling it won't." Now the murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Judge Grayson glanced at Carrington. "Does the prosecution have any issue with verifying the officer's GPS logs?" Carrington hesitated. Just long enough for the jury to notice. And the judge noticed, too. Breaking the case wide open. Carrington tried to regain control. "Your Honor, while we wait for the GPS records, the fact remains that the defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel." Jalen smiled slightly. "That's true. But let's talk about that evidence." He turned to the jury. The prosecution wants you to believe that because my fingerprints were in the car, I must have stolen it. But let's think logically. Imagine you go to a department store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, zip it up, then put it back on the rack. Hours later, someone steals that jacket. Would your fingerprints prove that you stole it? Several jurors exchanged glances. The car was parked outside a 7-Eleven. I was inside that store with 3 friends. Yes, I leaned against the car. Yes, I opened the door because it was unlocked. But I didn't take it. Does touching something make you a criminal? Carrington was flipping through his notes, scrambling for a response. But Jalen wasn't done yet. Your Honor, was the forensic specialist from this case subpoenaed to testify? Grayson blinked. He looked at Carrington. The prosecutor hesitated. Then, reluctantly, no. Jalen nodded. So the state is using forensic evidence against me, but they didn't think it was necessary to bring in the specialist who processed that evidence? Silence. Then Jalen delivered the final blow. I'd like to enter into evidence an official statement from the vehicle's owner. Grayson frowned. The owner? Jalen held up a document. Yes. Mr. Raymond Whitaker. He told the police that he saw the person who stole his car. Jalen took a breath before reading the statement aloud. I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off. But it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid, and he was white. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Jalen turned back to the judge. The arresting officer omitted this from his testimony. The prosecution ignored it. And yet, they want this jury to believe that I, someone who doesn't even match the suspect's description, am guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Carrington's face was flushed. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. Jalen shook his head. No, it's not. Judge Grayson exhaled and turned to the jury. He rubbed his temple. Then, finally, he spoke the words that changed everything. Case dismissed. The aftermath and the lesson learned. Jalen left the courthouse to a swarm of reporters. But this wasn't about him, it was about something bigger. How many other people had been wrongfully convicted because of bias, shortcuts, and a system that cared more about closing cases than finding the truth? Jalen had the knowledge to fight back. But what about the ones who didn't? This wasn't the last courtroom he would stand in. But next time, he wouldn't be the defendant. He'd be the attorney. And maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't be the only one.